Today we will be interviewing Dr. Vladimir Shalaev. He earned his master's in physics and a PhD from Krasnoyarsk State University. He received several awards for his research in the fields of nanophotonics and metamaterials, including the Max Born Award of the Optical Society of America, the Wiles-E Lamb Award for Laser Science and Quantum Optics, the IEEE Photonics Society William Stryfer Scientific Achievement Award, and Rolf Landor Medal for the electrical, transport, and optical properties of inhomogeneous media. He has also co-written 3 and co-edited 4 books and authored over 750 research publications in total. His H-index exceeds 100 with over 50,000 citations in total. In 2017 through 2020, Dr. Shalaev also featured in the highly cited researchers from the Web of Science group. So without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Vladimir Shalaev, Robert and Ann Burnett Distinguished ENC Professor and the Scientific Director for Nanophotonics at BNC, interviewed by our very own Sam Peana, ECN PhD student, and our former 2018 to 2020 NSAC president. So I will now pass it on to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mauricio, for the introductions. And thank you so much, Professor Shalaev, for joining us for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So to get started, we have to start with the very important questions of if you were stuck on a desert island and you could only bring one CD, I mean, maybe there's a CD player, but you could only bring one CD of music. Which CD would you bring with you?
Well, I guess in that regard, I wouldn't be particularly original. I love very much Beatles. So if I have to choose only one CD, that's what it's gonna be.
All right. Maybe there'll be a Yellow Submarine too.
Yeah,
come right afterward.
Yeah, it would fit the
it would fit the mood.
The situation.
So aside from music, so I've always been curious of how people get into the careers and the choices they make, and how they get where they are. So I guess if we could go all the way back to when you were a child, what did your parents do, and what was the environment like? What was a day in the life of, let's say, 13-year-old Vladimir Shalaev? And where was this?
Well, okay, so first of all, my father was a military officer, and my mother was a bookkeeper, so none of them really did science, but my mom actually clearly had quite a talent for math. She had to leave school because she was kind of harassed by her math teacher, but I remember then when we tried to solve some complicated Olympics problems in math, she would shock all my friends by doing it earlier than any of us. Anyway, but I grew up in the atmosphere where education was very important. That's actually typical for the former Soviet Union. So they were very much concerned in terms of me getting good education, and that's probably was the case for any other family. So, and to my surprise, even though I was always straight A student, but I did largely sports. I was very active in sports when I was young. And to my surprise, at some point, my father signed me in to a class. It was only a class of 20 students for our 1 million population city of gifted kids in math and physics. It was completely his initiative. I would have to actually take a bus to go there every day. But that changed my life. So I was 15 at the time. So, and I saw these kids really passionate about science, creative stuff, and I learned a lot from them. And that's pretty much kind of decided my future. I started to believe in myself. I talked to these people, and I realized how much fun to do science. So that was a turning point.
So what I guess everybody more or less knows that. You were good at math and physics when you were in the school, but what was your worst subject?
Well, I hated botany because to me it was like a set of facts, not inviting you to think or analyze. I thought it's quite boring, yeah. But of course, biology is a huge science, but botany, as the way at least I was taught it to, I found it.
So I guess I guess that botany is not the best. So how did you make it through that class?
Oh, it's easy. I mean, I mean, it's a, I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I was straight A student. I mean, it's easy. I mean, if you sit in the class, I mean, and listen to this, you just, I guess you have to remember some things and you do it, but it never excited me. But again, nothing wrong with botany. I guess it's just like the way I was taught it. And I like the subjects when you forced to think, to analyze, to be creative. That certainly wasn't the one.
Mm-hmm. So you were in the school. So which aspect of math or physics was most attractive to you at that time? Like what subject would like that you learned from all of the different like subjects? Because for example, whenever I was in school, I remember the first time I took geometry, it was like all of a sudden math was not arithmetic. So is there a particular subject that really?
So I mean, I liked most of that, but I do remember what I didn't like because it was really hardest for me. And that was called stereo geometry, when you actually have to do geometry kind of in 3D. And I should confess, had a problem with volumetric imagination. Therefore, astronomy was also difficult for me too. Like imagine things. As soon as I have a sketch of the problem, I would immediately do it. But to make a sketch, that was challenging. But to tell you the truth, since this class was kind of special for talented kids, we actually, the way we were taught was very exciting. Lots of problems, challenging, requiring really kind of non-trivial thinking. And I liked very much algebra. I mean, we started to study algebra in high school, actually. I remember I liked it quite a bit. But I should say, most of all, I liked physics. I mean, that was and large credit goes to my friend who actually learned me how to do physics by using your intuition. He always would shock me. We would be challenged with some problem. I would start working on this, trying to plug things into different formulas. He would do nothing and then write down the answer. And I said, how did you get it? He said, because I feel it. He also was great in poetry. For him, doing physics was like writing poetry. And I learned a lot from him. And I guess I would not go to physics if not him. So you met actually him, Vladik, I'm talking about him. He taught me to use 100% your intuition. When you think of physics, your kind of creativity, think of this like something going on in the real world, and that became fun thanks to him. And that's because before that I thought it just like memorizing things, plugging things into formulas, and that's what I teach all my students. No, it has nothing to do with physics. Physics is the world which you need to develop intuition to understand.
Right. So I guess that answers that brings up an interesting point, because I was wondering if let's say you were not permitted to become a scientist or to go kind of on the academic route, right? What career route would you take instead?
I thought you like me. Why you would push me to consider even this thing? I love science so much. But if I really have to, I guess I would think of like a high-tech business. I mean, people who are making basically change the world, like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. So I mean, and of course many others. So working in high-tech business and bringing something like changing computers, mobile phones, something that really changes the world, our life, that's truly fascinating. Of course, it's still, let's say, indirectly connected to science. So I don't want to go too far from there.
That makes sense. So basically, by the time you were in high school, you basically had no choice. You were stuck on this path.
No, Sam, it's actually more complicated than that. The truth is, I loved physics so much that I didn't dare actually to become a physicist. It's kind of strange, right? You love something and you think, no, it's too good for me because it's so special. And I decided to go to something outside of science, even after winning Olympics in physics. So I was clearly pretty good. But I thought that physics is from people like my friend Vladik, with huge intuition, and I was still kind of learning, and I had lots of doubts whether I should do science. So I decided to go to engineering or something like that, like most Russians go to engineering schools. And the decisive argument was kind of funny. Then my friend Vladik said, who of course went to physics department of our university, he would say, hey, I mean, we lived close to each other, university was far away. He said, well, if you go also to physics, we would have to take bus every day together to go there and back. And I thought for a while, and I decided that spending 2 hours, I mean, 1 hour there and 1 hour back with my best friend in the bus, that was a decisive argument when eventually I pushed me to go to physics rather than engineering.
That's amazing. Such a small thing.
That's a true story.
So what kind of engineering were you considering?
Well, I should correct myself. When I say engineering in the former Soviet Union, it's not what we call here engineering. It's like, I mean, like electricity, all that. It's normally detached from science. I mean, like regular engineering, like fixing things or building things. So not like here engineering is so closely interconnected with science. So it's not necessarily the case with traditional engineering. So I mean, the system of education in the US and in Europe and Russia is kind of different. So things which I'm doing here in engineering department, and I feel very much in the right place. Right. In Russia would belong physics, applied physics. So I mean, they don't do it in engineering institution. They do it in applied physics kind of schools. So that's somewhat different. What we call applied physics in this country, what called applied physics in Europe, for example, here very comfortably belongs engineering. So and that was my best move actually when I moved from physics department to Purdue engineering, and that's the place to be for me because I like technology-driven science. That's the combination of two best things.
Okay. So that's actually, I guess we can jump a little bit ahead. And so, because one of the other interesting things is whenever you approach projects, right, people have all kinds of motivations. There's people who are motivated just by, the beauty of science. There's other people who are much, very applied, like they want to see a product. So what would you say your motivation is when you approach a new project? Like what aspect of that work do you find most beautiful or most interesting?
Well, as my friend Federico Capassa says, he prefers also always technology-driven research science. And I should say this is also my motto, my approach. Basically, I mean, life is too short, and I want to be a part and a contributor to disruptive development in technology, basically to be part of technology evolutions which are going on. And usually these type of things are heavily based on science. And that's what I'm trying to do in my research, to bring together fundamental science and which enables really new technology. So to me, it's the most exciting things. So even though it's great to do just curiosity-driven studies, but if on top of that, you could do something which actually changes people's everyday life, like optical communication did, like computers did, transistors did, and now quantum does, that's a huge privilege. This is a luxury.
Of course. So out of curiosity, when you say applied, so the research we do in our group tends to be like on the cutting edge to the point where it may not see application in industry for some time. How soon do you want to see the technology that you develop applied to, let's say, commercial market? Because actually at this point, plasmonics are becoming kind of a commercial commodity. So like if you had to pick a scale, because
I guess this is individual. For me, let's say bringing something from a crazy wild idea to the point that it's clear doable. You just need to do a little bit extra, sometimes incremental engineering work. Well, the first stage, that's what I'm excited about doing. As soon as it's, let's say, clear that it's going to work, at least in principle, and the remaining things is just to put things together to make it work, I mean, to do some additional stuff. That's usually not of much interest for me. I'm sure that that can be done. So let's say I'd like ideally to take it from something, from some crazy idea based on fundamental science and bring it to the stage when people say, wow, it's work now. It could exist for some new device systems technology. And at that stage, I would prefer to jump on something else.
So
and let real engineers, I mean, down to earth engineers, do the rest.
Yeah,
although it's very important, I'm not saying too that it's less important. It's very important. It's just like not my strength.
Right. So the idea is you shine the light and point the direction, and then other people
and run away.
Run away. You're like, okay, here it is. There you go, guys. Yeah. So after you finish high school, just to loop back a little bit, how did you? So you chose to go to the physics department because of, incidentally, a bus route. Right. And now, how did you decide which university to go to? Because I'm sure as a sort of highly talented student, you had options. So how did you decide, and which university did you end up going to, and on what basis?
Well, okay, that's a good question. First of all, in Russia, it's a bit different. And moving from one city to another, at least in my time during the former Soviet Union, it was a big step. But I got all these straight A's from this very good school. So I clearly could go to one of the top schools. And the school I chose actually was the best engineering school, which is called Birck Technological Institute, or University, whatever it's called. And I went there and preparing myself for entrance examinations. They always have them. And I talked to all these people around, and I so much disliked people around me in Moscow. I don't know, of course it was accidental. I mean, I found them so, I mean, of course, not in general people in Moscow, those whom I was in contact, very pragmatic, speaking of who could do, I mean, things to help, to get around of some rules or whatever. I clearly didn't like it. I was perhaps too romantic, idealistic guy from Siberia, and I decided, well, hell with Moscow, I'm gonna be back to my city, Krasnoyarsk. And in Krasnoyarsk, there was only one university, and I wanted to get the fundamental education so that it could be used in many different areas. So basically, I didn't do entrance examination in Moscow. I just returned back, took my documents, and come back. And then this story with my friend, when I decided, well, maybe I go to some engineering school there, and he went to university, to physics, and well, I explained why I decided to go there too. So it's almost like accidental. I did love enormously physics, but it almost like precluded me from going to physics because it was too strong. But thanks God and my friend, eventually I did go to the physics department. But it wasn't the end of the story. I mean, it's being in physics department, I studied quite successfully, but I still kept my doubts in terms of whether I am the one to be successful to do research in this area. And I keep my doubts, and I remember that maybe in a couple of years, I took lectures of Professor Shalaev, who taught quantum mechanics, and there was a big class, like 100 students, and I kept asking questions. And he was quite an unusual professor, very talented guy. I mean, he never used any notes. He was a theoretical physicist, actually. And at some point, instead of saying that I should go and read more carefully textbook, he would say, well, if I would be able to answer this question, I probably would get the Nobel Prize. And I remember that exactly at that moment I decided, yes, I'm going to be a physicist. If I can ask good questions, then I can be a physicist, a good researcher. So, and that's what I use through all my career. So I encourage people to ask questions. It's very, very important. And nobody knows the ultimate truth, or, I mean, having doubts, it's normal. I think it's abnormal when people self-confident, don't have any doubts, and I find it strange. But first, my friend and my teacher helped me to develop this confidence, and eventually I decided to do what I love to do, and which actually made my career in life really happy. And of course, I'm very grateful to them and many others who later encouraged me in my work.
So this is it's basically actually Misha Shalaganov, who we interviewed a few weeks ago, said that his career has been like a random walk of miracles. So it sounds like you have a similar sort of experience of just almost like miraculous things going on. But the question I have is whenever you went to the university, how did you decide, like, because physics is a very broad field, so how did you decide which area to go into? So now we're getting more into like master's and PhD. Like, how did you decide what to do your thesis on? How did you decide who to work with and what area of physics to work in?
Well, in my case, it was decided by most bright teachers. I mean, I mentioned this Professor Shalaev, and he was the first one I started to work with. And then Professor Popov, who eventually became my PhD advisor, who was doing laser physics, nonlinear optics at the time, and really, really exciting stuff. And his lectures were just really, really amazing. So, and that's what affected a lot. And the way they actually taught it, that it's not like something set in stone, it's something which develops right now. And he's doing this, his lab is doing this. And he would invite me to be part of his group and actually be part of this new science which was creating right at that moment. And being a part of things which is where you contribute in, which hopefully would stay in the history of science, that's a very special feeling. And I would suggest to use this experience to all students when you decide to choose the area to work in. I mean, you probably want to, you study today, but you would be working and contributing to science, engineering, technology tomorrow. You probably would like to choose an area which gonna make a difference in the near future, and look at professors who work in those areas where you believe next technology evolution gonna happen, and professors who are actively doing science, actively contributing to that area. And, so if you're excited about that, that's the right place. And also the human factor, you would like to be part of a team where you feel really comfortable. People are enthusiastic, you're part of this, you love them, so you spend lots of time with them. It's like a family, it's very important when you choose your family. In this case, research family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest achievements I've seen in your group, actually, is the cohesion of the group is actually very strong. The other thing that I should point out to for the audience is that Professor Shalaev's advisor, Popov, was actually, I think he had the second working laser in the world. So like this was really, really cutting edge. So you've chose your advice. So basically you're just so basically you decided to work in optics because it just so happened that one of the world's kind of leading pioneers in laser physics was teaching it at Krasnoyarsk. Okay, so you do all of the work there. So whenever you did your PhD, I assume it was more along theoretical lines than along experimental lines. So how did you make the decision to become more of a theoretical physicist rather than more of a hands-on experimental researcher?
Let's say, well, with Popov, he actually was a theorist himself, but eventually he became a head of experimental lab, pretty much like my situation as well. And Professor Shalaev, he was a theoretical physicist as well. And part of the truth, I'm really not good with equipment, and I respect so much good experiments that I better not touch equipment. So to make sure that it works well, and I also, I mean, the way I study, it's kind of interesting. After 2 years of study, when I met Professor Sadreev, actually, we stopped attending any lectures. He would give us Landau's course of theoretical physics. We would read, come and ask him questions. Pretty much we studied a lot at home, just reading textbooks, and that was theoretical physics. So he kind of influenced me, and I decided to be a theorist. But since I always was, at some point I remember that I was thinking of some theory, and I was thinking deeper and deeper and deeper, and then I got almost like scared. Oh, but does it really exist? I mean, it's kind of was so far away from real life, and I should say that at that time I was substituting for my friend who was trying to meet ants and working as night guard in some clinic, and it was kind of strange in nighttime, and I got scared that what I'm doing. Actually, I found a solution to some very exciting problem at that point, and I remember how Professor Day was surprised. But at the time, I was a bit scared that it's too far from perhaps reality, and then I started to think more, work more like in a theory closely related to experimental, real experiments that could be done, and that was happening in Professor Popov's lab. And eventually, when I moved first to Europe, then to the States, I kept working as a theorist, but closely collaborating with experimentalists. And at some point, I realized that I know, except that I don't do myself experiments, I know a bit about experiments. So and when they interviewed me in Purdue, I remember they asked me that, well, we like what you presented, but we want you to start a lab. I forgot who it was, maybe Andy Weiner, maybe somebody else. And it kind of clicked with me. Yeah, I'm ready. I want to start my own lab. I would hire people who would help me in terms of making experimental setups, but I think I have ideas. I think what kind of things to do. And that's actually, after moving to Purdue, I started my own experimental lab, which you are a part of now.
Oh, right. That's actually interesting. I guess I never realized that you did not start any experimental lab until you came to Purdue.
Yeah.
So that brings us, I guess, to the next sort of stage. So you're graduating from Krasnoyarsk, and then how did you decide where to go next after graduating with your degree? Like, how did you decide what to do next? I think, if I remember correctly, you stayed at the university for some time.
Yeah, well, actually not for that long time, for my PhD studies in just a few years after that. Well, my friends from actually encouraged me to apply to this Humboldt Fellowship in Germany, which absolutely amazing thing. And they explained me how to do it. And I applied for this Humboldt Fellowship, and actually really best researchers whom I met, like Akhmanov in Moscow, is a big, he was a huge personality in nonlinear optics, nonlinear spectroscopy. He helped me to get this fellowship. He recommended me. Eventually I got this fellowship and moved to Germany and then to France under this Humboldt Fellowship, working in really good groups, world-class groups, and always working, actually doing theory, but working closely with experimentalists, and that's became kind of my my approach to research at that time. So again, my decision was helped by good people. So I mean, it's very important to work with people. There is nothing more important than people around you who are smart, talented, who could help with good advice. And I was really blessed meeting outstanding people. And if you would ask me what is the best, most important, valuable thing related to your career, I would say the possibility meeting all these people who really outstanding, whom I learned so much from.
Right. That is definitely the greatest, I think, part of being in academia, is just
absolutely, yeah.
People are unparalleled. So what projects were you working on at during this Humboldt Fellowship?
Well, in the very beginning of my PhD studies, we were actually more like on nonlinear optics, nonlinear spectroscopy in gases. And then I met Mark Stockman, who unfortunately recently passed away. And when we were doing skiing during one of the workshops which we had in Siberia, in my city, Krasnoyarsk, so we started to think of fractals. It sounded like kind of exotic materials, very different from anything studied before. And we started to think of doing optics of fractals. And we actually were the very first one, the only one person who did about in the same time it was Michael Berry in UK. So we pretty much developed with Mark Stockman optics of fractal system. Then later I did it with optics of percolation systems. That's what I did back in Russia. Then I moved to Europe. I continued to work on fractals because I felt that this is an entirely new field. Physics is really fascinating there. And we were kind of among leaders, and that gave me opportunities to do this optics of fractals. And then I continued to work on various physical systems which actually represent fractals, like percolation system, random films, rough films, and I did it in Canada with Professor Martin Mosque. Then I moved to US, and that was the field I was working initially, but then this idea of metamaterials came of crazy negative index and so on. And then I switched to this field. And that's a kind of learned from my research career. You always want to think ahead of time. So what you talk about during your presentation now, it's not necessarily what your mind is largely preoccupied with. You should think like 2-3 years ahead. You should think what's next big thing you should do. And through all my research career, I actually quite dramatically changed the fields, but trying to take what I learned from the previous field to bring it to a new field so that it could give you advantage and some kind of possibility to work at the cutting edge in a new field. But you should always be ready to go outside of your comfort zone and jump into a new field if you would like to stay relevant in terms of doing disruptive research, something which really could make a big difference.
So that actually brings up, like, from a technical or logistical point of view, since experiment has this time it takes to kind of flourish, right, to build it up, to get all the equipment set up and to begin doing experiments. How do you balance, right? Because you don't want to have a position where you're shifting so often that you're never able to develop the deep expertise, like, from an experimental point of view, to make an impact. But you also don't want to be too slow where you're never changing. So how do you, what do you have a particular, like today the weather is right, we're sailing somewhere else feeling?
Well, in my case, it was easy because if you look at all different areas I was working in, there is one unifying motif, which is photonics, the science of light. And since from the very beginning, I was working on nonlinear optics, lasers, nonlinear spectroscopy. It's all about light, how light couples to matter. What changed actually is matter light couples to in terms of my research. And in terms of experimental activities, you need basically lasers. You need this all these good, advanced, powerful lasers that enable all these all different light sources. And then this opportunity came with this Birck Nanotechnology Center. It's actually happened exactly this at the time I moved to Purdue, and realized, well, I could do really fun materials and study interaction of light with metamaterials, all this type of metasurfaces, all these exotic materials, nanostructured pattern materials. And but in terms of experimental setup, it's basically laser lab, which you always have, and that helps you to jump from one field to another one. Basically, you change the materials you study with light.
I see.
Having Birck Nanotechnology Center, it's not a big challenge because it's a truly fantastic place, and that's what actually what gives us advantage. We have all these facilities to fabricate anything you could think of. So, but having a laser lab in place, that enables this continuity, and this is kind of easy transition from one field to another one.
I remember when I was, because I talked to Professor Popov and also to you to look at the kind of arc the career. So basically, you went from gases and gas dynamics to two-dimensional 2D media, and then it just so happens that there was a perfect time when all the e-beam and nanofabrication tools became available, and all of a sudden, everything you could apply from random became, you could cheat basically and make any material instead of having to rely on nature.
Speaking of random and metamaterial, that's also an interesting story. I was working on fractals, which are quite often random structures. They do have the scale invariance fractal morphology, but still they are random. And I remember yet another person who kind of affected a lot, Eli Blanovich from Berkeley. He would say, "Hey, Vlad, you seem to be a smart person. People don't like random. People like ordered things. Why don't you start working on something ordered?" And but I didn't want to do photonic crystals that Eli was doing and many others people were doing, because I wanted to do something different and special. And that actually how I ended up doing the metamaterials.
Well, that you actually, I never thought about that. So the question is actually why, what was it about photonic crystals that actually dissuaded you from going in that direction? Because you would have been kind of in a good position to do that. But what were the factors that led you to kind of skip over? Because it went photonic crystals and then the metamaterials came, so you sort of jumped over that era.
Well, well, because I was doing fractals, and it was so exciting, and it's also physically very challenging. I mean, physics is really kind of quite non-trivial there. And in parallel, people working on these photonic crystals. So I was busy with my field. I felt that it's very important, unique, and in a sense, the photonic crystals field developed quite significantly. So if I would jump there, I would probably be not even the second. And I normally prefer to be among the first. And that's one thing. And also, I felt also that photonic crystals, they have beautiful physical properties, but largely based on this very delicate interference. I mean, this multiple scattering, these band gaps, it's very sensitive to the order. So I didn't see it's like robust enough field. And then this idea of metamaterials came, and I felt that basically many things that you do with photonic crystals could be done with metamaterials and in by far more robust fashion. But ironically, these fields, photonic crystals and metamaterials, kind of merge now. People don't distinguish them much. I mean, this is like kind of peculiarities, but you could say that photonic crystals is a part of metamaterials in the broader sense. Of course, it depends how you define this, but they all artificially designed, engineered materials that have properties not attainable with those existing in nature. And in that regard, they're kind of similar, even though there are some things like metamaterials, usually structural units much smaller than the wavelengths, whereas in photonic crystals, they kind of match the wavelengths. But I would say this is peculiarities. Still, they're very, very close relatives, cousins.
Right. Particularly now that sort of it's going like in a cycle almost, because it was dielectric photonic crystals, then it went to metallic metamaterials. Now we're back to dielectric sub-nanometer, or not nanometer, sub-wavelength features. So this is how this is why you skipped over that field. So basically the assessment was based on two things. One is the practicality of scaling up fast enough to make a reasonable impact. And then the second aspect was just a feeling that this field would be too sensitive from an experimental point of view to realistically do. So now we've gotten to plasmonics. That was an entire era that came. So I guess if you had to go and look at all the work you did, I think since you got into metamaterials and all of this, which work would you consider the most significant? Not necessarily the best or the most cited one, but the one that you feel has like the most scientific merit or the most kind of impact.
Well, plasmonics, what is really special about this, that's the way to confine light down to nanoscale. And that's really fantastic properties that you confine all the energy to the area much smaller than the wavelengths. And when I was working on this fractal percolation films, semi-continuous random films, based on metallic structures. What happens in this case, because of this fractal morphology, these collective plasmon excitations tend to be localized in the very small areas, which we call hotspots actually. And the hotspots when it comes down to fractals and percolation systems, I guess we did it first, and we predicted that because of these hotspots, areas of high local fields, you have dramatically enhanced nonlinear responses. Basically, and the higher nonlinearity, the stronger enhancement, because you have increased local field raised to some high power, which depends on the order of nonlinearity, and you get this dramatic enhancement. This strongly enhanced nonlinear optics of plasmonics-based random composites, specifically fractals and percolation films, I think we did quite pioneering work in these areas, which I'm very much proud of. And I also should say that very similar ideas we then took to the field of metamaterials, because with metamaterials, particularly those based on with plasmonic, I mean, dielectric metamaterials, of course, very popular. You have some advantage there, smaller losses, but they're still diffraction limited. With plasmonics, you could concentrate light to the area much smaller than the wavelengths. And so many ideas which we developed for these random composites kind of became very essential for metamaterials. One of the fathers of metamaterials, for example, John Pendry, he also worked in the past on localization in random systems. Kostas Sakoulis, yet another protagonist in the area of localization in random systems, started to work on metamaterials. It's kind of interesting that lots of people working on this localized optical excitation in random systems move to metamaterials and use that experience. I would say that metamaterials as a field very closely related and grew out of these composite materials.
Right. Yeah, that's what struck me when I looked and I saw that jump, because it's, if you think about it from an experimental point of view, it's, you have a material where it's like a thin metallic film that is random versus a pattern film, but from experiment, it's actually almost the same thing, except that mathematically it's probably much more tractable because you now have a lot of order and rules to take advantage of. Right. So it's an interesting, it's like it's easier in some senses, but also more popular.
Yeah, and when it comes down to metamaterials, we first worked on these plasmonic metamaterials, and we're very proud to show first negative index in metamaterial, the magnetism across the whole visible part of the spectrum, and that's all was plasmonics-based.
So I guess we found like a project that you're most proud of, but what is a direction that you thought would be really great that ended up not going anywhere at all, or that you ended up being, you know, not nearly as good as you had hoped? Like, if you had to pick, if you could go back in time, right, and say, I'm not doing research on X things, which project would you say didn't pan out?
I have been working on a very exciting project, and to some of my surprise, it didn't go as far as I think it would at the time. And that's called light-induced drift. It's actually quite interesting phenomenon. Then, you know, there is radiation pressure when light pushes particles, atoms, and that results in drift. So, but that's normally a small effect. And this light-induced drift is basically kind of based on entropy exchange. What you do, you excite your atoms, and because excited atoms are slightly larger in size than unexcited atoms, they experience a different friction when they collide with buffer gas. And as a result, basically what happens when light incident in absorbing gas, which is an atmosphere of buffer gas, it results in pushing absorbing gas against buffer gas. They move in opposite direction. So in this case, the momentum that they get is on the order of momentum of particles, mv, and which is 300 meters per second, and which is much larger than hk. So, right. And that happens in a sense due to entropy. Basically, light has First low entropy, it's directed, then it's scattered in all directions, entropy increased, whereas eventually you have random gas, buffer and absorbing gas, entropy is large, but then eventually you have this moving against each other, absorbing gas and buffer gas. And that effect was predicted by Shalaev and Gelmuhanov, and we did also some work in that. Then we extended for metals, and there were also some important work on semiconductors. So you actually induce drift or current if we are talking about charged particles with light, and the effect is much stronger than the one related to momentum of photon. And although there were quite a number of publications, interesting demonstrations, but it didn't become, let's say, kind of technology. I would say I had fun, and many people all over the world worked on this, but it didn't become as big as I would expect at the time. So and you should be always ready for this. When you want to attack really biggest problems, most challenging, to think that all of them going to end up like a huge technology breakthrough would be way too naive. You have to be ready for failure. That's normal. That's part of the game. So some of it would succeed eventually, for sure, but some would not. And that's you should be ready for.
Right. So now when you look out, like how do you look into the world and decide this field that you believe is going to become something big in 2 to 3 years? Like, what is your style of doing this? Do you talk to colleagues? Do you read lots of papers? Do you sit in a lawn chair and stare at the night sky, or a combination of all of the above?
Sometimes, literally, as you just mentioned, you just sit in the somewhere like in a lunch when you between flights, and so thinking what do you do next. But the important thing here is, let's say if you're doing very relevant research, which kind of at the cutting edge, you should not feel comfortable about this, because it probably in 2-3 years it would become kind of mainstream, and then it would probably would become more like smaller things would be important there. If you would like to do research, disruptive breakthrough, like you always have to think what you're gonna do next in 2-3 years. And that always, let's say, the mode of my thinking. So when I was working on this on fractals, I asking myself what I'm gonna do next, and then these metamaterials came, and so then I started to think what I'm gonna do next, and now I'm thinking about how to use ideas of metamaterials and plasmonic for quantum, because that's where the next technology evolution is going on now. And I believe that with plasmonics, which enable this truly dramatic speed up of quantum processes, you could actually beat decoherence. You could enable processes that would be faster than quantum decoherence, which is a stumbling block for quantum. And I believe that the interface between metamaterials and quantum, you actually could do really great things, and potentially quantum photonics, quantum communications at room temperature, at terahertz rates, which enable through this plasmonics, through the confinement light, to exceptionally small volumes, nanometer scale volumes, and because of that you have this dramatic per cell enhancement. So I'm giving all this as examples, like you always should think ahead what you're going to do next. And usually it's smart to use what you learned from the previous field, like in the latest example, we're using what we learned in metamaterials and then later meta surfaces, where we did a number of firsts, but now we're trying to apply it to quantum. And right now we are busy what we're going to do next. So that's the thinking process.
So how did you decide that this quantum that the quantum was the next big thing? Because there's many things going on, and so how did you, like, what are the hallmarks for you of a field that is going to become like revolutionary? Where do you get the information that you make this decision on, or what do you base it on?
That's a very good question. I mean, the first and necessary condition, it should be really exciting and a little bit like almost like crazy. Like, you know, that some famous physicists would say, if it's not crazy enough, it's not exciting. It's probably not. It's not worth doing this. So to me, it's a necessary condition. It should be very, very exciting. But I mean, I also looked at probably a number of fields. I mean, if I would come back, I probably would jump more actively into quantum earlier. At some point, I was doing, of course, very exciting stuff, and I didn't want to leave it. But maybe it would be a good idea to start moving toward quantum direction earlier. So it was not that obviously that it would become really this second quantum technology evolution, which is based on entanglement, quantum speed up, all this quantum computing, quantum communication. Let's say some time ago, it looked too distant future. Now we believe it's actually not that distant future, particularly when it comes down to quantum sensors and quantum communication. Quantum computing is still a challenge. So, I mean, my point here, I did my mistakes, as everybody does, but you should keep trying. So you should, what would be a mistake? You're in a field which is now the mainstream, you're happy, I mean, you're among leading researchers in this area, and that's it. So you should be prepared that that's gonna change. Right. And new fields would come out, and you should use your intuition. I mean, reading papers, talking to your colleagues, and dreaming, fantasizing. So what's going to be next? But it's very important. You might be wrong, and might be turn out to be not as exciting as you expected. But you always should keep trying. That's at least certainly the case for our research group. We're always thinking, let's say, several years ahead. Right. And sometimes we succeed, sometimes perhaps not. But you cannot blame us that we are not trying.
Definitely not. In the years I've been in the group, I've seen the like jumps. I've been around long enough to see that the group is always pivoting to find the new direction. So I was wondering, was there any person like Yablanovic, but for quantum? Because Yablanovic sort of was like, hey, like, look, metamaterials, you should do ordered structures. Was there anybody like that for quantum for you? That was like, hey, look, this is coming.
I would not name a particular single person in this case. I just, I mean, I attended these conferences. I like to go not only to conference in my field, like in the past, I went to all these materials conference, and everybody is doing great stuff. Everybody feels happy. But I always try to go to conferences which are broader in a sense. It could be smaller in size, but much broader in terms of ideas. And one of such conferences, for example, PQE, Physics of Quantum Electronics, run by Marlon Scully in Snowbird, he usually invites people from different areas which potentially could become big. And by attending this type of conference and seeing talks on quantum, on what's going on there, I realized, hey, it's time now. But you have to come there with your own ideas. And so I decided, well, we see this opportunity. We have this plasmonic speed up. You make processes much faster through the confinement, and that might help us to solve this one of the biggest problem of this quantum decoherence. So, but basically attending conferences and talking to best people, and we're coming back to what we discussed earlier. The biggest asset, the biggest privilege in our work is meeting these fantastic people, creative, thinking out of box, always looking for new solutions. I mean, this is such a privilege, and I have this privilege. I mean, I know a number of these people. I enjoy talking to them, and that's when and how it happens.
Okay. So that's yeah. So it all comes down to the people that you can be, that you basically you're going to be the average of the people you're around.
That's absolutely back to that. I mean, it's nothing more important. I mean, therefore, I always teach my students to try to surround you by best, most unusually thinking people who better than you. I always encourage my students to be better than me. I mean, it's boring if you like you're better than others. You want to be with people who are more talented than you, that would become better than you. You learn from them. And I don't know, I always love to work with people who, let's say, bigger, know more than you, from whom I could learn. When I was really young, I always would go try to get to the best groups, to the best people, and try to learn from them. I think that's really what makes it so exciting. So, and that's also this famous formula, you know, to keep life-work balance. Because in this case, since we are doing creative work, It's like you call it work, but in a sense it's life. It's fun.
Right.
So you kind of shift this, something which counts for work, but in reality it's like life. So
right.
I'm kidding about this, but I mean, it's like one of the famous Soviet physicists said when he was asked, please define what is physics, he would say, physics is the way to satisfy your curiosity at the expense of taxpayers. We basically have this luxury. We satisfy our curiosity. We do creative work. What could be better than this? And we do it with people who are so bright, from whom you could learn so much.
Yeah, I think if anything can convince somebody to go into academia, it is definitely this like statement, basically. There's no, I don't know, it doesn't seem like there's much more exciting in the world.
To me, it's the best job in the world, that's for sure.
Well, it looks like we're pretty much out of time. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, to give us some of your hard-earned advice that you've picked up over time, and hopefully we'll see you on here again.
Yeah, you will. Thanks for interrogating me right before the weekend. So, I had fun. Well,
you'll sleep better.
To talk to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor.